Think about it. Why are we still alive? Humanity has survived 2 world wars, endless earthquakes, tsunamis, and deadly diseases. While 99% of all life forms that ever existed on Earth have gone extinct, somehow we're still here. Why? What makes humans so different? Now imagine this. What if the real reason we've survived isn't luck or strength, but a secret, a hidden society exists, one with access to a powerful time machine? Every time Earth faces total destruction, whether from war, disaster, or plague, they secretly rewind time and change the outcome. Each time, they guide the world into a new timeline where the danger's avoided. To the rest of us, life goes on like nothing ever happened. But in truth, Earth has already been destroyed thousands of times. We just never remember. On July 1st, 2022, in London, app designer George visits the bank to request a loan for his new project, Hazard Lights, an app designed to predict major global events using data analysis. He secures the loan and celebrates with his girlfriend Sarah, who surprises him with news of her pregnancy. They soon marry, excited to start a family. 3 months later, a deadly virus called MERS-22 begins spreading rapidly, overwhelming hospitals and causing global panic. On Christmas morning, George and Sarah develop symptoms and head to the overcrowded hospital, worried for their unborn child. The next day, George wakes up to find it's July 1st again. Sarah acts as if nothing has changed and urges him to go to the bank. But when he arrives, there's no record of his previous visit or the loan. Confused and unsettled, George reacts poorly, and this time, the loan is denied. At home, George tells Sarah that the day is repeating, but she thinks he's just being silly. The next morning, he asks her to take a pregnancy test, but she refuses and says he's acting strange. Later that day, George checks the internet and sees that the MERS-22 virus has already started spreading. He warns Sarah that a pandemic is coming, but she thinks he's losing his mind and tells him to get help. The following day, Sarah comes home and finds that George has gone into full survival mode. He's bought a hazmat suit and stocked up on supplies. Fed up with his behavior, Sarah leaves to stay with her parents. As George tries to follow her, a woman named Archie approaches him and starts talking about time loops. She says she has answers and gives him a business card, telling him to use it if it happens again. The next morning, George wakes up on July 1st again. This time, he keeps quiet and heads straight to the address on the card. He finds an old empty building, but decides not to go in. The next day, July 1st repeats once more. This time, George goes inside and finds Archie. She tells him he's a mutant, part of a very small group of people who can feel when time jumps are happening. Most people get the ability to sense time jumps through a special serum, but a few develop it naturally. George is one of the rare cases. He's actually gone through 20 time jumps, but he only remembers the last 2. Archie explains that all of this is part of something called the Lazarus Project, a secret international group that uses time travel to prevent global disasters. In other timelines, the world has ended many times from wars and pandemics, but the Lazarus Project has always stepped in, using time jumps as a last resort when all else fails. She takes George to a hidden facility where the organization builds the tech behind the serum and the time machine. Archie explains they can only jump to fixed moments in time, called singularities, and July 1st is one of them. She invites George to join the team, and he agrees, especially after learning they were the ones who created the COVID vaccine. When he gets home, he tells Sarah that he got the loan, pretending everything is normal. The next day, Archie introduces George to the rest of the Lazarus Project team, including their leader, Wes. Most of the agents have military or police backgrounds, so George feels a bit out of place, but everyone is kind and welcoming. He starts basic gun training, though most of his work focuses on research. George feels fulfilled knowing he's helping save the world, and he still has time to spend with Sarah. Their relationship stays strong. One afternoon, George uses his app's software to trace suspicious financial activity and notices unusual transactions in a Russian account. It turns out to be tied to a security company guarding Big Boy, a nuclear warhead. The buyer is Dennis, a dangerous ex-agent who once worked for Lazarus but went rogue. Later, George drops Sarah off at the school where she works. As she crosses the street, a truck almost hits her, but George manages to pull her back just in time. Not long after, the Lazarus team heads to Paris to track down Dennis. George stays in the surveillance van with Dane, watching as agents storm a building, until suddenly their camera feed is disrupted. Inside the Paris building, the agents begin exchanging gunfire in the corridors. Archie heads to the basement to investigate, but as soon as she enters, she's shot by Dennis. Seeing this from the van, George panics and rushes out to help, only to witness Dennis crashing through a window on a motorbike. George quickly jumps back into the van, and a wild chase begins, damaging multiple civilian cars. Soon, police join the pursuit, pursuit. As the police cars crash one by one, George opens fire, but misses every shot. Eventually, they force Dennis to crash. Dane steps out to arrest him, but is immediately shot and killed. George then engages Dennis in a shootout, but just as things escalate, police surround them. In a final act, Dennis detonates a bomb, wiping out the entire city. The time loop triggers, and George wakes up back on July 1st, right in the middle of an intimate moment with Sarah. Shaken, he clings to her in fear. The next day, George drops Sarah off at school again, but this time, he receives a text calling him into work early. As he rushes off, the truck from before appears, and with George not there to stop it, it hits Sarah. The story then flashes back to the summer of 2018, showing Archie on a mission in Russia with her partner Ross. Archie and Ross sat on a rooftop in Russia, helplessly watching missiles soar through the sky, signaling the end of the world. Moments later, the time loop reset. Back in the present, George waits anxiously at the hospital as Sarah undergoes surgery. Archie visits and tells him that Dennis has been captured. Shortly after, a doctor informs George that Sarah is still unconscious and may never wake up. When George finally sees her, he begins experiencing disturbing visions from previous timelines. Another flashback to 2018 shows George at a party where a friend introduced him to a girl named Sarah. That same night, he went home and drank with Archie, who hinted that the timeline had been drastically altered that year. In a further flashback, Archie and Ross are shown trying to warn Russian military officials about the incoming missile strike. They weren't believed, and once again, they were forced to witness the world end, only to be thrown back into the loop. In the present, despite being emotionally wrecked, George chooses to return to work. Archie warns him that he's clearly suffering and shouldn't ignore the trauma. She also tells him he can't save Sarah from the accident, and trying to do so would be selfish. Another flashback reveals that Archie and Ross had both left their previous partners to be together. When the Russian government refused to act on their warnings, they were forced to take matters into their own hands by launching a missile at the Prime Minister's chief while he was in his car. Unfortunately, Archie and Ross's drastic move, firing a missile at the Prime Minister's chief, didn't stop the attack. The missiles launched again. Meanwhile, at the 2018 party, George finally met Sarah. But when a cigarette accidentally started a fire, chaos broke out, and he lost her in the crowd. In the present, George is approached by Shiv, the only other natural mutant on the team. Shiv suggests they get revenge on the man responsible for Sarah's accident. George agrees at first, but when they reach the man's house, he realizes that hurting him won't bring Sarah back, and walks away. Back in 2018, Archie and Ross broke into a government building in a desperate attempt to stop the war. A gunfight broke out, and Archie was killed. That triggered another loop, and she had to go through the heartbreak of breaking up with her boyfriend again. Reuniting with Ross, they came to a grim conclusion. The only way to stop World War III was to install a fascist leader in Russia. They launched a coup, and their candidate rose to power quickly. But just as he gave a speech, he was assassinated, and once again, the missiles rained down. At the party, George kept missing his moment with Sarah. Archie and Ross tried plan after plan, breaking up with their partners each time, but nothing worked. The missiles always launched, and George never managed to reconnect with Sarah. Eventually, Ross admitted that the only time their plan had worked was when Archie died. But instead of accepting the outcome, he selfishly triggered the loop to bring her back. Archie was furious, calling him out for valuing her life over the fate of the world. This time, Ross acted alone. He planted a bomb in a restaurant where key politicians were meeting. Archie watched helplessly as Ross was shot before the blast, an explosion that finally stopped the war. Afterward, Archie begged Wes to reset time and save Ross, but Wes refused. Around the same time in the US, George and Sarah finally met properly and began a real relationship. In the present, George and Shiv visit Dennis, who is being held in the Lazarus Project's basement. Dennis tells them he doesn't know where the warhead is, because with the time loop resetting, Lazarus captured him before the handoff ever happened. He then starts pushing George to question the organization, claiming Lazarus tortures people for information and often sacrifices innocent lives in order to prevent bigger disasters. Dennis believes the world has been trying to end itself for a long time, and that Lazarus is unnaturally delaying the inevitable. In his eyes, he's just letting nature take its course. Moments later, George receives a phone call. Sarah has died. Devastated, he rushes to the hospital and breaks down when he sees her body. Emotionally shattered, he returns to Dennis, this time ready to listen. He agrees to hear Dennis out and follow his lead. Meanwhile, in 2017, another Lazarus agent named Janet took a test and found out she was pregnant. The father was Dennis, back when he was still working for Lazarus. 2 weeks before the July 1st reset, Janet gave birth to a healthy baby boy, but But just hours before the checkpoint, China threatened to unleash a chemical attack. Desperate, Janet ran to Wes, begging him to find another way. But Wes told her they had exhausted all options. The loop had to be triggered. As Janet broke down in despair, time reset and she woke up in bed again, pregnant as if the birth had never happened. Janet eventually gave birth again, but this time to a baby girl. For a year, everything seemed fine, until the summer of 2018, when constant time loops began. Janet and Dennis were forced to relive the birth and first year of their child over and over, only to lose her each time the loop reset. After the Russia mission ended, Dennis confronted Wes. When Wes showed no remorse, Dennis snapped, shot Wes's assistant, and tried to kill Wes too. Shiv stepped in, disarmed him, but Dennis knocked him out and escaped. In the present, Dennis refuses to give any useful information, so Lazarus is still searching for the missing warhead, Big Boy. They discover a rebel group called Lost Glory might be connected and plan a mission to Prague to find them. George wants to join, but Archie says he's not mentally ready. While the team is away, George secretly visits Dennis, who gives him a YouTube channel name and an address in Barcelona to contact Lost Glory and warn them about Lazarus. George follows the lead and finds the address, only to see the door already open. Suddenly, George is held at gunpoint by Dennis's contact, who turns out to be Janet. She releases him after he uses Dennis's secret code words. George sees a child with her and realizes it's her daughter. After hearing his plan, George asks for her help in setting up a detonator to destroy the nuclear warhead, Big Boy. Janet agrees. Meanwhile, in Prague, the Lazarus team searches a house deep in the forest. It's empty, but they find mysterious drawings on the wall. Back in Barcelona, George spends the night at Janet's place and hears the full story about her baby and the loops. The next morning, he wakes up to find Janet gone. She's left him a tin containing the detonator and a note that reads, "I hope you get her back." A flashback to 1981 reveals that Shiv had been different since childhood. As a baby, he learned to crawl, walk, and speak in full sentences, all in a single day. Over time, he began dreaming about future events. His mother dismissed it, but Shiv knew they were real. Eventually, he started testing the loops by memorizing horse race winners. When time reset, he bet on the correct names and made a fortune. With the money he earned from betting on horse races during time loops, young Shiv bought the video game console he wanted and lots of new clothes. One evening, he visited his uncle's shop, only to find it had burned down and his uncle had died. Thankfully, that night, the world ended and a loop reset everything. The shop was back, and his uncle was alive. Determined to stop the fire from happening again, Shiv rushed to the shop and discovered his cousin had started it for insurance money. Shiv stopped him just in time, but his cousin had already called the police and was arrested. When Shiv got home, Wes was waiting, there to recruit him into the Lazarus project. In the present, Shiv is interrogating Dennis about the documents the team found in Prague, but Dennis refuses to give any answers. George privately criticizes Shiv for using violence during the questioning. Shiv defends his actions, explaining that poor intel once led to a failed mission, which caused the time loop that trapped Dennis and Janet in endless baby loss cycles. He's determined not to let that happen again. A flashback shows that when Dennis escaped from Lazarus' custody, Shiv chased him down. Their cars crashed, and both men pulled weapons. After a tense standoff, Shiv shot Dennis in the leg and captured him. Dennis was taken to the hospital, but escaped soon after by killing a guard. When Shiv went looking for Janet, she had already vanished. In the present, George receives messages from Sarah's family about planning her funeral, but he ignores them, choosing instead to focus on decoding the strange drawings found in Prague. After feeding all the data into his software, George discovers that the nuclear warhead, Big Boy, is located in Romania. Acting fast, he buys a plane ticket using Sarah's credit card. The next morning, George calls in sick to the Lazarus office. Suspicious, Shiv has their hacker Ryan quietly check both George and Sarah's bank accounts. When they discover the truth, Shiv heads out alone to track George, telling Archie that he just called in sick. Ryan sends Shiv real-time updates every time George makes a purchase. George boards a train, and Shiv takes a cab to catch up, managing to get on the train thanks to a schedule delay. He searches the train until he finds George, and a fight breaks out. George knocks Shiv out and takes his gun. He pulls the emergency brake, breaks a window, and runs into the nearby fields. Shiv wakes up shortly after and begins chasing him again. They race through a small town until George ducks into a building, trying to slip out a window, but he falls instead. Quickly recovering, he steals a bike. Not far behind, Shiv fights off two men and steals a car to continue the chase. Outside the town, George hits a blocked road and crashes again, barely getting out of the way as Shiv slams into the bike. Shiv catches up and tries to reason with him, saying grief is clouding his judgment and that he won't be able to justify killing thousands just to save Sarah. But George, cold and determined, responds by shooting Shiv twice. He takes Shiv's phone and, pretending to be him, texts Ryan with a message to visit visit Dennis and use a specific code word. Ryan follows the instructions, only for Dennis to snap his neck through the bars the moment the code word is spoken. Back with George, he loads Shiv's body into the stolen car and continues his search for Big Boy. A flashback to 2014 reveals Archie working undercover for the UK Secret Service. After a wild day with criminals and a police chase, she returns home, only to find Shiv waiting. He tells her this isn't their first conversation and warns her that arresting the criminals will spark a massive war and ultimately bring about the end of the world. At first, Archie didn't believe Shiv's warning in 2014, but after he revealed classified information, she realized he was telling the truth and agreed to give the Lazarus project a chance. In the present, alarms blare through Lazarus HQ after Ryan's sudden death. Archie scrambles to find a new IT specialist who can access Ryan's files and uncover what happened. She tries calling George, but he ignores her. Meanwhile, Wes questions Dennis, who claims Ryan gave him a death code, something only a mole inside the organization could have passed along. Dennis also reveals that this same mole sabotaged the Prague raid. Back on the road, George is pulled over by police because the car he's driving is stolen. He handles the questioning poorly, distracted by new messages from Janet. Panicking, he suddenly speeds off, triggering a high-speed chase. George grows more reckless by the minute, barreling down roads with no concern for others. While driving, he calls Archie and says he's in Romania following a lead. He accuses Shiv of being part of Janet's rebel group and claims Janet has been receiving money from Shiv. This is technically true, but Shiv only sent the money out of guilt over the repeated loss of Janet's baby. Archie confronts Dennis about it, and he lies, backing up George's story and saying Shiv was the mole. Archie struggles to believe it. Her mind is flooded with memories of Shiv's loyalty, especially how he never sugarcoated the dark, painful decisions Lazarus had to make to save the world. Shiv had once warned Archie that repeated time jumps could cause visions from other timelines, even of her own death. Over time, Archie began to recall all the times Shiv had tried to warn her and how she ignored him. Still, it's not until she checks his bank records and confirms George's story that doubt turns into fear. She texts Shiv but gets no response. Meanwhile, in Romania, George is still on the run. He hides the stolen car in a narrow alley, thinking he's finally safe. But just as he steps out, a police car crashes into him, popping open the trunk, revealing Shiv's body. As the officer approaches, he's suddenly hit by a truck. The driver gets out, and George, now in full panic mode, shoots him. Realizing how far he's fallen, he breaks down in frustration. Still using the same car, George finally reaches the location from the drawings. Inside, he's ambushed by a man known as the caretaker. After a rough fight, they end up in a standoff, until the caretaker accidentally falls down the stairs. When he wakes up, George gives him the gun as a sign of trust. Convinced they're on the same side, the caretaker agrees to help. They drive to a remote building where George finally sees it. Big Boy, the nuclear bomb, sitting in the back of a truck. Since the area around them is just open fields, George and the so-called caretaker agree to move the warhead to a more populated area to maximize its impact. Unbeknownst to George, a car is following them, and it's bugged to listen in on everything they say. A flashback reveals that 24 hours earlier, a group of mercenaries ambushed and killed the real caretaker. One of them took his place, waiting for George to arrive with the detonator. In the present, George casually mentions that only he can activate the detonator. The mercenaries, needing him alive, play along. But soon after, the truck breaks down on the road. George spots the tailing car in the mirror and suddenly attacks, punching the fake caretaker and slamming his head against the steering wheel. Stepping outside, George opens fire on the mercenaries. He manages to kill one before a gunfight breaks out. The fake caretaker regains consciousness and shoots George, forcing him to hide under the truck. A civilian car approaches, but the mercenaries kill the passengers, giving George a chance to strike back and eliminate the rest. He tries to restart the truck, but it won't budge. Refusing to give up, George sets the detonator and escapes in a different car. While driving, he calls Archie and lies, claiming Shiv took the bomb and he couldn't stop him. After getting far enough from the blast zone, George detonates the warhead. The massive explosion is quickly detected by the Lazarus systems. He heads to the airport to flee but can't find a flight. Luckily, a group of wealthy young travelers, impressed by him, invite him onto their private jet headed to London. During the flight, George sees the devastation the bomb has caused. Suddenly, he finds himself waking up at home with Sarah until the building begins to shake and a second explosion brings everything down. He wakes up again, realizing it was just a nightmare. Back at the Lazarus office, George claims that after decoding the information, he tried to call and warn Wes, but Shiv answered and manipulated him with lies. To support his story, he hands over Shiv's phone. He then asks Archie about the aftermath of the explosion, only to learn that it killed just a few hundred people, not enough to trigger a global conflict or cause a time reset. George is devastated. He's killed innocent people and won't be able to bring Sarah back once the next checkpoint passes. Wes examines Shiv's phone and sees the messages George sent while pretending to be him, which seems to confirm his story. To verify, she checks with Dennis, who confirms the code word was correct. Wes and George then visit the Russian ambassador to assure her the bombing was the act of a rogue rebel, not a political attack, but George has other plans. Still determined, he secretly contacts the ambassador again later and tells her the British were involved, even revealing the location of the farmhouse in Shiv's body. A few hours later, George meets with the ambassador, who confirms they found the body, just as he said. The Russian ambassador refuses to start a war based on George's limited evidence and tells him to come to Russia with stronger proof. Desperate and out of options, George snaps. He shoots the ambassador, her security team, and her husband, but spares their son, forcing him to hit the panic button. Moments later, alarms blare at the Lazarus project. Russia has launched missiles. With no other option, Wes initiates a time reset, even though it means losing Dennis in the process. George experiences a rush of visions from different timelines before waking up in bed beside Sarah. Overwhelmed with joy, he clings to her. Meanwhile, Dennis is once again free and goes into hiding. Shiv, who also remembers everything, is back and burning with rage. Archie tries calling him for answers, but Shiv ignores her. Shiv eventually tracks George to his building, only to find him already waiting on the stairs with a gun. George calmly explains how he framed Shiv to take the blame. Shiv, realizing that killing George would only make things worse, walks away. The next morning, George drops Sarah off at work and finally prevents the accident from happening. When he arrives at Lazarus, Archie informs him that Ryan's records support George's version of events and no one has heard from Shiv. Agents are searching, but he's good at disappearing. George continues to be haunted by visions from past timelines, but tries to ignore them. Meanwhile, in Paris, Lazarus attempts the same operation to capture Dennis, only for him to be ready this time. Within minutes, he kills every single agent. Weeks pass. George enjoys a peaceful life with Sarah, pushing aside the visions. 3 months later, the couple travels to Paris, where George proposes. Sarah accepts until the next morning, when she confesses she made a mistake. She tells George she doesn't want to marry him, explaining that they've both changed too much and she hasn't been happy for a while. She insists on paying for her share of the trip, then walks away. Sometime later, Archie informs George that Shiv's credit card was used at a bar in Germany. George checks the nearby security footage and is shocked to find multiple bodies at the scene, along with a necklace belonging to Janet's group. Wes quickly orders Archie and George to investigate. At the crime scene, they discover Janet's DNA and signs that someone had been held hostage, leading them to believe the shootout was actually a rescue mission. Further footage reveals the presence of Agent Zhang, suggesting that the Chinese government is involved. Days go by, and soon it's June 30th, the night when a new checkpoint will be created at midnight. At 11:57 p.m., George hears someone entering his apartment. He grabs his gun and cautiously leaves the room, only to be ambushed by Shiv. A fierce fight breaks out, ending with George shooting him just as the clock strikes 12 a.m. Since this marks a checkpoint, Shiv will now remain dead in his apartment no matter what. Panicked, George rushes to her body and finds a blood-soaked piece of paper. Just then, his neighbor Reggie knocks, having heard the commotion. George brushes it off, claiming he was just watching a movie, even though his shirt is still stained with blood. Afterward, George drags Shiv's body into the elevator, unaware he's being recorded. He drives for hours to the harbor, sets the car on fire with the body inside, and walks back to his apartment where blood still stains the floor. Though he plans to clean later, he meets Sarah at a cafe, only to learn she's met someone else and is getting married. Heartbroken, George returns home, cleans up, and burns the blood-stained note he found on Shiv. 3 weeks later, George keeps trying to reach Archie, but she won't respond. One evening, a detective confronts him. Reggie had reported his strange behavior, and the elevator footage is damning. Just as the detective moves to arrest him, a blinding light fills the sky, and time suddenly resets, sending George back to the moment Shiv died in his apartment. Confused, he realizes this loop didn't follow the usual rules. A flashback reveals what happened in Germany. Janet was Zhang's hostage, but during a raid, Shiv appeared and a gunfight broke out. Zhang escaped with Janet, who dropped a note containing one of Dennis's passwords, the same note George later burned. Back in the present, George handles Reggie more smoothly during the repeated timeline. Soon after, Wes calls him in. At headquarters, George learns the blinding light was from 2 black holes colliding, an event so massive even Lazarus can't stop it. As a result, they're now stuck in a continuous 3-week time loop until a solution can be found. The collision of the 2 black holes creates a singularity, and George notes that such events don't happen randomly. Someone must be behind it. Wes suspects Janet, the only one smart enough to orchestrate it, meaning if Zhang has her, China is likely involved. George endures another painful meeting with Sarah, then goes shopping for supplies. This time, he carefully wraps Shiv's body, disables the security cameras with paint, and dumps the body in the river. Meanwhile, in Shanghai, Archie confronts Zhang's sister and forces her to give up an an address. But when Archie storms the location, she's gunned down by agents, triggering another time reset. In the new loop, George skips meeting Sarah, causing her to show up at his place instead. She catches him loading the bloody body into his car and panics. George chases her down, convinces her to get in, and finally reveals the truth about his real job. He takes her to the Lazarus office, and although initially shocked by the violence, she comes to understand his mission. They reconcile and spend the night together. The next morning, she agrees to keep his secret, and George disposes of the body once again. Back in Shanghai, Archie takes a more aggressive approach with Zhang's sister, threatening her family. This time, she gets the real address and sneaks into Zhang's room, only for Zhang to immediately go on the defensive. A fierce fight breaks out between Archie and Zhang, both displaying impressive combat skills. Archie manages to cuff them together, but Zhang, seeing no way out, self-deletes, triggering another time loop just as George finishes a lovely date with Sarah. In the next loop, Archie returns to Zhang's hideout, but this time Zhang is ready with a gun. She reveals she remembers the loops too. China has been secretly developing its own looping tech. Zhang admits she handed Janet over to a handler, but doesn't know their current location. She also reveals her organization has been monitoring the Lazarus project and that George inadvertently led them to Janet, leaving Archie stunned. Back in London, Sarah once again catches George with the body in his car. This time George panics and accidentally runs her over. Strangely unfazed, he loads the body and waits for the next loop. From then on, George keeps repeating the same cycle, attending Sarah's meeting, hearing she's engaged, and disposing of Shiv's body again and again. As the repetition wears on, Lazarus grows frustrated, and Wes considers involving the government. She even thinks about getting the loop serum herself. After this tense meeting, George returns home, only to find Archie waiting for him. Archie confronts George, revealing she knows he killed Shiv. She warns him to help Shiv in the next loop or face consequences. When time resets, George photographs Shiv's injuries and, posing as a cop, consults a doctor about her collapsed lung. Unfortunately, the doctor confirms nothing could have saved her. Frustrated, George returns home to find Sarah waiting, but he coldly acknowledges her engagement and tells her to leave. In the next loop, George snaps at Reggie when he knocks, shoving him out. The following day, Reggie apologizes, and George notices his uniform. He's a paramedic. Realizing this might be useful, George then brings the bloodied paper to a curator, who cleans it to reveal Dennis's code word and Chinese characters meaning time machine. Later, George steals some Lazarus serum and visits Sarah. He explains everything and offers her the serum so she can experience the alternate timelines. Though hesitant, she accepts the injection, and George leaves her to process it. Back home, George finds Dennis waiting. Dennis asks about Janet, and George explains that Archie is searching for her and that they're trapped in a singularity. Dennis finds the note Shiv dropped and is about to explain its significance when the loop resets again. This time, George rushes to get Reggie's help in time to save Shiv's life. Meanwhile, in Shanghai, Archie meets with Zhang and shares her theory. China's attempt at creating its own serum went wrong, causing the singularity. Believing Janet is the only one capable of fixing it, they must have kidnapped her to help. Zhang then reveals she's located Janet. Together, Archie and Zhang infiltrate the building where Janet is supposedly held, silently taking out guards on their way up. But when they reach the room, it's empty. In London, Reggie manages to revive Shiv briefly. He gasps out, "Dennis is the key," before passing out again. At the same time, Dennis arrives at Lazarus, knocks out a guard, and shares what he remembers from the last loop. The code word on Janet's note was a message: "I'm in trouble, come and get me." Dennis explains that Janet isn't missing. She's no longer in their timeline. Someone has broken through the checkpoint. Archie and Zhang were in the correct location, but the wrong time. Janet is actually in London in 2012. Back then, while Dennis was with his own Janet, he received a strange text he didn't understand. Until now. It was from the Janet trapped in the past. He knows where to find her and insists Lazarus must send him back to fix everything. Back at George's apartment, Shiv is alive and recovering. Just then, Sarah walks in and reveals she remembers everything too. She took the serum. And so, united at last, they must now save the world. This marks the end of Season 1. Stay tuned for Season 2. Until then, bye-bye.